Well, buckle up, because this story is a classic tale of disaster, despair, and a governmental response so baffling it makes you want to scream into a pillow, or perhaps several pillows. Our story begins in September 2024, when Hurricane Helene, a monstrous Category 4 storm, decided to pay North Carolina an extended and utterly unwelcome visit. This wasn't just a bit of wind and rain, mind you. We're talking record-breaking flooding, particularly in the western part of the state. Asheville, a lovely city known for its vibrant art scene and stunning mountain views, found itself submerged in what experts grimly dubbed a 1,000-year flood event. Which, if you're keeping score, is not something you generally want to experience more than, say, once a millennium. The sheer force of Helene was devastating, carving a path of destruction that left communities reeling and landscapes horrifically altered. But the most tragic toll, as it always is with these catastrophic events, was the human one. Over 230 people lost their lives in the storm's fury. Think about that number for a moment. Over 230 souls. In Buncombe County alone, officials confirmed at least 72 deaths. Each number represents a family shattered, a future stolen, a community mourning irreplaceable losses. This wasn't just property damage, it was a profound human tragedy, the kind that demands compassion and swift, decisive action from those in power. It's the sort of thing you'd expect a functioning government to take, seriously. In the immediate aftermath, the scenes were apocalyptic. Roads were impassable, transformed into raging rivers. Bridges were washed away, isolating entire towns. Homes and businesses, the cornerstones of people's lives and livelihoods, were either completely destroyed or rendered uninhabitable, filled with mud, debris, and despair. The task of just clearing the wreckage was monumental, let alone thinking about rebuilding. Naturally, North Carolina, facing a catastrophe of this magnitude, did what any state would do. It looked to the federal government, specifically FEMA, for the substantial help it so desperately needed to even begin the long and arduous process of recovery. The scale of the disaster was simply too vast for state and local resources alone, and initially, there might have been a glimmer of hope, a belief that help would indeed be forthcoming in full. After all, under the previous Biden administration, there was a policy directing FEMA to cover 100% of state funds for disaster cleanup in many instances. This precedent suggested a robust federal commitment to helping states get back on their feet without the added burden of crippling financial obligations when they were already down. North Carolina therefore had a reasonable expectation that this level of support would continue, especially given the 1,000-year nature of the flooding. Oh, how quickly those expectations would be, shall we say, adjusted. Or, to put it more bluntly, utterly demolished. So, North Carolina is on its knees appealing for maximum assistance, and what happens next? Well, on May 28th, or possibly the 29th, the exact date is a bit fuzzy. Unlike the clarity of the denial, FEMA, now operating under the astute guidance of the Trump administration, delivered its verdict, and that verdict was a resounding nope. The state's request for 100% federal cost sharing for Hurricane Helene relief was denied, and just to add a little salt to the gaping wound, this was reportedly the second time FEMA had rejected North Carolina's plea to extend a 100% cost match for the cleanup from Tropical Storm Helene, because apparently once wasn't quite emphatic enough for them. Now you might be wondering, what was the profound, well-reasoned justification for this denial? Surely, for a disaster that claimed over 230 lives and caused a 1,000-year flood, there must have been a compelling rationale. According to Acting FEMA Administrator David Richardson, an extension of the 100% federal cost share for debris removal and emergency protective measures was, and I quote, "not warranted." That's it, not warranted. No further elaboration offered in the initial reports, just a bureaucratic shrug in the face of immense suffering. It's the kind of anemic explanation that makes you wonder if the official FEMA dartboard for decision-making just landed on tough luck, guys. This decision becomes even more baffling, or perhaps more cynically predictable, when you consider the recent political theater. Back in January 2025, President Trump himself visited North Carolina. During that visit, he was all sound and fury, criticizing the Biden administration for what he termed inadequate relief efforts for Hurricane Helene, and of course promising strong, decisive action if he were in charge. Fast forward a few months, and his administration is the one slamming the door. To make matters even more surreal, Trump has recently mused about the possibility of eliminating FEMA altogether. Yes, the primary federal agency for disaster response. It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off. For whom exactly remains unclear. This isn't just an isolated incident or a personal vendetta against the Tar Heel state, though it certainly feels personal to those affected. It signals a significant shift in policy, or at least the enthusiastic embrace of a harsher one. The traditional cost-sharing model for disasters has typically been 75% federal and 25% state. The move away from the 100% federal match seen under Biden, and now this outright denial for an extension, aligns perfectly with President Trump's stated belief that states should largely handle their own disaster relief. It's a philosophy that sounds ruggedly individualistic until your state is underwater and facing bills it simply cannot pay on its own. The financial implications of FEMA's not-warranted stance are, to put it mildly, catastrophic for North Carolina. Governor Josh Stein didn't mince words, stating that this denial will cost state residents hundreds of millions of dollars. That's money that was desperately needed for small businesses trying to reopen, for repairing critical infrastructure like roads and bridges, and for addressing the myriad urgent needs in western North Carolina, the very region still submerged in Helene's aftermath. This isn't an abstract budget line item. It's a direct hit to people's ability to rebuild their lives, their homes, and their communities after an unimaginable disaster. It's basically telling them to find spare change under the sofa cushions to pay for a biblical flood. And North Carolina isn't alone in this new, fiscally austere reality of federal disaster non-response. Oh no, this particular brand of tough love is being spread around. Arkansas, for instance, had its aid request denied after suffering severe storms and tornadoes in March 2025. What's particularly ironic, or perhaps just deeply cynical, is that even states that overwhelmingly supported President Trump, like Mississippi and Missouri, have also faced FEMA aid rejections. Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders and Missouri Senator Josh Hawley, both staunch allies, publicly requested federal assistance. They were denied. It seems loyalty doesn't buy you a federal lifeline anymore, just perhaps a sympathetic tweet if you're lucky. Compounding this already dire situation is the rather alarming news about FEMA's own readiness, or spectacular lack thereof. An internal review, which someone probably tried to bury, indicated that FEMA is not ready for the 2025 hurricane season. And when does that season start? Oh, just tomorrow, June 1st. Perfect timing. The agency is reportedly grappling with significant staffing limitations and a troubling lack of coordination. Adding to this recipe for disaster, FEMA is facing budget cuts to the tune of $646 million and a reduction of about 1,000 staffers. So fewer people, less money, and less coordination, all while the storms are, quite literally, gathering. This is less like preparing for a fight, and more like actively disarming yourself before walking into a brawl. And the brawl is coming. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, those science folks who actually study weather patterns, has predicted an above-average hurricane activity for this 2025 season. They're expecting somewhere between 13 to 19 named storms. So, the forecast is more frequent and potentially more intense storms, while the primary agency meant to help people cope is being systematically weakened, and is telling states they're on their own. It's a perfect storm of bad policy and bad weather. And the people in the path of these hurricanes are the ones who will pay the price. This isn't just mismanagement, it's an abdication of responsibility on a national scale. If you thought denying aid to disaster-stricken states was the endgame, well, hold on to your hats, because the vision for FEMA's future under the current administration seems to be even more ambitious. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, presumably taking cues from the top, is reportedly considering either eliminating FEMA entirely or at the very least, significantly downsizing it. This follows President Trump's directive to reform the agency. Now, reform can mean many things, but when it's coupled with talk of outright elimination and massive budget cuts right before hurricane season, it starts to sound less like thoughtful improvement and more like taking a sledgehammer to your own emergency services. It's a bold approach to public safety, akin to firing all the firefighters because you want to reform fire prevention. Naturally, actual emergency management professionals, the people who, for a living are sounding the alarm. Lynn Budd, the director of the Wyoming Office of Homeland Security, has argued quite plainly that states simply lack the resources to manage large-scale disasters on their own. This isn't some radical left-field opinion, it's a fundamental understanding of fiscal realities and logistical capabilities. States, especially those frequently hit by increasingly severe weather events supercharged by climate change, cannot conjure billions of dollars and coordinate massive multi-state relief efforts out of thin air. The idea that they can just handle it is frankly delusional. There's a very practical reason states can't just shoulder these burdens alone. They are legally required to balance their budgets. Unlike the federal government, they can't operate at a deficit indefinitely, or print money when a 1,000-year flood decides to show up every few years. They can allocate emergency funds, yes, but these are typically for immediate response, not for the colossal long-term recovery costs that mega disasters entail. The federal government, through an agency like FEMA, is supposed to be the backstop, the entity, with the broader financial shoulders and national reach to step in when disaster overwhelms local and state capacity. That's the whole point. So, what are the broader implications if this trend continues, if FEMA is indeed hobbled or dismantled? Who will step in when the next Hurricane Helene, or something far worse, pulverizes a coastline or a community? This isn't just a North Carolina problem or an Arkansas problem. It's a flashing red warning light for the entire country. We are witnessing a deliberate erosion of our national capacity to respond to crises, driven by an ideology that seems to prioritize shrinking government over protecting its citizens. This is a dangerous gamble, a reckless experiment with American lives, livelihoods, and the very fabric of our communities, all seemingly on a whim before the winds even start to blow. And frankly, it's terrifying.